Welcome to Cold Case Story. Today, we are going to start this story on the 26th of December, 1900. I want you to really picture this scene in your mind, to put yourself right there. It is the absolute dead of winter, the bitter, unforgiving cold. A heavy supply vessel named the Hesperus is violently pitching and rolling, basically fighting for its very survival, as it forces its way through the freezing, churning waters of the North Atlantic. The crew on board, they are exhausted, they are freezing, and they are heading toward a completely remote, desolate cluster of rocks located roughly 20 miles west of the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. This jagged, unforgiving place is known as the Flannan Isles. Now, for barely a year, a brand new, state-of-the-art lighthouse has stood at the very highest point of the largest rock in this cluster. It was built there to serve as a desperate warning beacon, pushing back against the darkness to keep passing ships from smashing into the treacherous coastline. But as the weary crew of the Hesperus battles through the heavy, oppressive seas, peering through the heavy gloom, they notice something that sends a complete shiver down their spines, something absolutely terrifying. The lighthouse is completely, utterly dark. There is no piercing beam of light cutting through the thick storm clouds, nothing at all. In fact, no light has been seen from this remote station for 11 straight days. Passing ships had actually been reporting this ominous absence for over a week, but previous relief vessels sent to check on the men, they were beaten back by monstrous, towering waves. The sea literally would not let them anywhere near the island. But now, finally making landfall, the crew of the Hesperus is about to uncover a scene that makes absolutely no sense. This is an explanation of one of the most chilling, unexplained maritime mysteries in human history. Okay, so let's dive right into this and see what they found.
So what happens when three men vanish from a locked island? Because that is the central, impossible mystery we are unpacking today. We really need to talk about who these men were because it is absolutely crucial to understanding why this is so baffling. The men stationed at this lighthouse were not easily frightened amateurs. They weren't easily spooked rookies experiencing their first storm. No, they were hardened, highly trained maritime professionals. You had James Ducat, the principal keeper, a seasoned, deeply responsible family man of 40. Then there was Thomas Marshall, the first assistant, a highly experienced and capable mariner at 28 years old. And finally, Donald MacArthur, the acting second assistant, who was also 40. And MacArthur, he was a man known far and wide for his incredibly tough, uncompromising demeanor. He was a brawler, a guy you just didn't mess with. We are talking about three incredibly strong, resilient men. Together, they possessed decades of combined maritime experience, tasked with keeping that crucial light burning at all costs. It was their sacred duty. And yet, somehow, without sending any distress signal, without any warning at all, they completely disappeared from an isolated, sheer rock surrounded by miles and miles of freezing, hostile ocean. I mean, where could they possibly go? How does a fully staffed, newly constructed, structurally sound lighthouse simply go dark without leaving a single trace of the men inside? Let's see how this builds, because I promise you, the grim details of the search only deepen the paranoia. Section 1. The Dark Lighthouse. December 26th, 1900. When the relief keeper, a man named Joseph Moore, finally breached the heavy lighthouse doors, the sheer, chilling normality of what he found completely defied explanation. I want you to imagine the extreme, suffocating tension Moore must have felt. He had just agonizingly climbed the steep, slippery stone path from the docks, calling out to his friends, hearing nothing but the wind and absolute silence in return. When you imagine an event horrific enough to cause three tough, capable men to just vanish off the face of the earth, you instinctively expect chaos, right? You expect a violent crime scene, shattered glass, broken furniture. But investigators found absolutely no sign of a struggle. None. There was no blood on the cold stone floors, no splintered wood, no indication whatsoever of violence, mutiny, or a desperate fight for survival. Instead, the building was impeccably tidy. It was eerie. The keepers' beds had been neatly made, smoothed out like it was just another morning. In the small, cramped kitchen area, the dishes from their last meal had been cleanly washed and properly put away in their designated spots. All the heavy doors and iron gates were properly secured from the inside, locks tight to shut out the fierce winter weather, and the official lighthouse logbook? It was left out on the desk, kept completely up to date in beautiful, calm handwriting. Everything looked perfectly, flawlessly calm. It was honestly as if the men had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving their perfectly ordered lives permanently frozen in time. But wait, there was one detail. One single, glaring, deeply unsettling anomaly in that pristine room. An overturned chair. In a claustrophobic, tightly packed living space where everything else was meticulously ordered and stowed away perfectly, a single wooden chair lay knocked over on the cold stone floor, right next to the kitchen table. Now you might be wondering, why is one tipped over chair such a big deal? Well, the crucial point is this. This solitary overturned chair completely shatters the illusion of a calm, planned departure. It's like a giant red flag in an otherwise perfect room. It suggests a sudden, explosive interruption to their quiet, methodical routine. It tells a silent, haunting story of a moment of profound urgency, or maybe a sudden, heart-stopping alarm. Something caused one of these deeply seasoned, disciplined men to leap up from the table so fast, with such sheer, unadulterated panic, that he didn't even pause for a fraction of a second to right the chair he knocked over. He just ran. Whatever happened to James, Thomas, and Donald started right here, in this seemingly peaceful kitchen, with a terror that arrived entirely without warning.
Section 2. The Impossible Logbook, a Documented Terror.
As Joseph Moore frantically searched the living quarters, desperately looking for any clue, he found the official logbook laying open on the desk. Its final entry was dated December 15th, which, if you remember, is the exact same day passing ships first reported the lighthouse had gone dark. But what was written on those pages was horrifying. The logbook revealed a rapid, escalating psychological breakdown in the agonizing days right before they vanished. This wasn't your standard, dry record of routine lighthouse maintenance. It was a real-time, handwritten diary of a descending nightmare. Let's look at the timeline. On December 12th, Thomas Marshall noted that an unprecedented severe storm struck the island. The writing describes violent, screaming winds and monstrous, towering seas unlike anything these veteran sailors had ever witnessed. Moving to December 13th, the entries take an incredibly dark, disturbing turn. The log records that the men are fundamentally terrified. It literally says they are weeping and praying in fear. Then, on December 15th, a chillingly brief final entry notes that the storm has ended and the sea is calm. God is over all, it says. And then, the lighthouse goes dark. Forever. You really have to understand how wildly, completely out of character this behavior is. These hardened Scottish maritime professionals spent their entire adult lives facing the wrath of the sea. They laughed at rough weather. For them to be reduced to weeping and praying means they wholeheartedly believed they were facing imminent, unavoidable death. I want you to seriously consider this deeply unsettling entry written by First Assistant Thomas Marshall. Ducat had been crying. MacArthur was praying. Think about the sheer, mind-numbing level of terror required to produce this specific scene. James Ducat, the principal keeper, the absolute authority figure and father, reduced to helpless tears. And then you have Donald MacArthur. Remember him? Known far and wide as a tough, combative brawler who quite literally feared no man. To have a guy like that brought to his knees in desperate, pleading prayer, it's almost unthinkable. These men trusted the massive, incredibly over-engineered stone walls of the lighthouse. It was specifically designed and explicitly built to withstand the absolute worst the North Atlantic could throw at it. Yet, sitting inside this secure, unyielding fortress, they were completely consumed by a profound, agonizing dread. What could possibly be happening right outside those thick walls to make veteran sailors, guys who have seen it all, believe they were completely doomed? What did they see? But here is the deeply disturbing twist that elevates this from a tragic maritime accident into a truly inexplicable mystery. While the Lighthouse logbook frantically described the most violent, apocalyptic, world-ending storm imaginable raging for days on end, regional weather stations located just a few miles away on the nearby Isle of Lewis recorded rough but completely unremarkable weather for the season. Let that sink in for a second. There was no massive hurricane. There was no unprecedented storm system tearing through the region. The catastrophic, earth-shattering tempest terrifying the keepers seemingly only existed directly over the tiny, isolated rock of the Flannan Isles. Or, even more chillingly, it only existed in the minds of the three men trapped in that lighthouse. How is that possible? How could a violent storm completely isolate one tiny rock, generate enough force to terrify seasoned sailors, and go entirely unnoticed by everyone else just a short distance away? Was it a bizarre microclimate, or were they experiencing a shared, terrifying hallucination? Section 3. The Rogue Wave Theory, the official explanation. So to explain the seemingly inexplicable, authorities eventually settled on a terrifying three-step sequence. When the Northern Lighthouse Board conducted their official investigation, they desperately needed a grounded, scientific way to explain how three experienced men could be wiped off a rock without a trace of blood or struggle in their living quarters. They couldn't put ghosts or madness in an official report, right? So they pointed to massive rogue waves. If you don't know, rogue waves are freak mountainous walls of water, sometimes 80 to 100 feet tall, that build to extraordinary heights in the open ocean with absolute zero warning. Here is how they mapped it out. Step 1. Investigators theorize that one man went down to the highly exposed lower rocky platform near the docks to secure rattling crane equipment that was getting battered by the surf. Step 2, an enormous unseen rogue wave strikes the platform out of nowhere, instantly crushing the man and pulling him into the freezing abyss. Step 3, the remaining 2 men inside the lighthouse look out the window, see this horrifying accident happen, and rush down the steep, slippery stairs in a desperate, frantic panic to help their friend. But in their frantic attempt to save him, a second massive rogue wave strikes the rock, and they too are mercilessly swept away into the dark, freezing water. It's a clean, mathematically plausible sequence of events. It wraps up the mystery in a neat little tragedy.
And what gives this official theory undeniable weight is the actual physical evidence they found outside. Searchers found significantly moved equipment and extreme storm damage on the lower platform of the island. We're talking heavy, incredibly dense wooden supply boxes normally secured high above the high water line, and they had been violently displaced. Thick, heavy-duty iron railings, metal meant to last a century, were bent, snapped, and completely twisted by unimaginable force. The solid rock face of the island itself showed fresh, deep gouges at heights that indicated an enormous, towering volume of water had smashed against it. This physical damage definitively proved that, regardless of the calm regional weather reports from nearby stations, something immensely powerful and completely devastating had battered the lower levels of the Flannan Isles right around the time the men vanished. So case closed, right? A tragic act of nature. Well, not quite.
Section 4. The missing oilskins, a flawed theory. We absolutely cannot close the case file just yet, because when we go back inside that pristine, eerily quiet lighthouse, investigators found a damning clue that completely fractures the official rogue wave story. 2. Just 2. 2 sets of heavy, wet weather oilskins, these are the incredibly thick, waterproof coats absolutely necessary for survival out in those elements, were found still hanging quietly on their wooden pegs right by the entrance door. Now remember, there were 3 men stationed on the island. 1 set was missing, meaning 1 man had properly dressed for the harsh conditions before leaving the lighthouse, but 2 sets remained inside. This single, stubborn detail completely undermines the idea of all 3 men rushing out together, or the remaining 2 rushing out to save the first. Look, if you are a seasoned maritime worker born and raised on the harsh Scottish coast, you do not, under any circumstances, go out into a freezing North Atlantic gale without your heavy coat. It is deeply instinctual. It is basic day 1 survival. To leave your oilskins behind is basically a death sentence. So we have to ask the logical question. Why on earth would 2 highly experienced keepers run into a catastrophic storm without their coats? If they were supposedly rushing down to the lower platform to save a colleague who had fallen into the water, they would know without a shadow of a doubt that they were heading into extreme, life-threatening danger. In a storm they themselves described in the logbook as deeply terrifying, stepping outside into the freezing spray in simple indoor clothing is practically suicide. They would know that they'd freeze to death on the rocks before they could even attempt to pull a man from the churning surf. This incredibly jarring contradiction stubbornly circles us right back to the overturned chair we talked about earlier. The only logical explanation for leaving their absolute most essential protective gear behind is sheer, blind, mind-shattering panic. Something so immediate, so unbelievably horrifying happened right there in that room that it instantly overrode decades of deeply ingrained survival training. They didn't have 5 seconds to grab their coats off the peg. They didn't have 1 second to right the chair they tripped over. They just ran. But the ultimate question is, from what? Now, over the decades, public fascination completely warped the narrative, essentially turning a real documented tragedy into a campfire ghost story. You might have heard variations of this tale. A lot of that stems from a famous 1912 poem written by Wilfred Gibson. He romanticized the event by inventing fake, spooky details, like half-eaten meals left warm on the table and fires still burning brightly in the hearth when the rescuers arrived. But the documented facts, they are actually far more chilling than the ghost stories. Official police records and Northern Lighthouse Board reports definitively confirmed the real state of the room. Cleanly washed dishes, a dead, completely cold hearth, 2 abandoned oilskins hanging neatly on the wall, and 1 solitary overturned chair. The stark, historical reality is deeply troubling. The meticulous, calm order of the room, contrasting so violently with the totally illogical missing coats and the knocked-over chair, points to a specific, terrifying reality. It paints a picture of highly competent men driven out of their safe haven by an unimaginable terror. The truth is scarier than the fiction.
Section 5. An unanswered question. The sea kept what it took.
To this very day, modern analysis still leans heavily on the rogue wave theory. mostly purely because it is rooted in verifiable physics. We know rogue waves exist. Yes, a colossal freak wave could easily snatch a man into the dark water, but it simply cannot explain the impossible, localized storm recorded by deeply terrified men, while the rest of the region was calm. It absolutely cannot explain seasoned, veteran sailors completely abandoning their life-saving winter gear in the dead of December. The Flannan Isles remain profoundly isolated today, just a jagged speck of rock battered by an ocean that is entirely unwilling to give up its dark secrets. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur vanished without a single sound, leaving behind a beautifully kept lighthouse and a dark mystery that stubbornly defies all logic. So what do you think happened that pitch-black night on the Flannan Isles? Was it truly just a freak of nature, a massive rogue wave that caught them all in a tragic cascade of human errors and sheer panic? Was it a bizarre, undocumented, localized weather phenomenon that caused a shared psychological break among the men? Or did these three rational, hardened sailors encounter something else entirely out there in the freezing dark? Something so terrifying that it made them kick over a chair, completely ignore their winter coats, and run out into the abyss. Leave your best theories in the comments below. I would love to read them. And please, don't forget to subscribe to Cold Case Stories so you never miss a deep dive into the unexplained. Until next time, keep questioning and stay curious.